I never imagined that the woman staring back at me in the mirror that morning would become someone I barely recognized by nightfall. My name is Mary Ann Thornton. I'm 72 years old, and I live in what used to be the most beautiful corner of Charleston, South Carolina. You know those old Southern homes with the wraparound porches and magnolia trees that have seen generations come and go? That's where I've spent most of my life. In the house my late husband Thomas and I built together with our own savings and dreams. But let me tell you about the morning that changed everything. It was a Thursday, around 5:30 in the morning. I remember because the grandfather clock in the hallway had just finished its chiming, and I was sitting in my favorite armchair in the kitchen, the one with the faded floral cushion that Thomas bought me 30 years ago. I had my reading glasses perched on my nose, trying to focus on a recipe book, but my mind kept wandering. The house felt different lately, heavy with a tension I couldn't quite name. My daughter Victoria had been living with me for the past 3 years. She moved back after her divorce, bringing along her bitterness and her wine bottles. At first, I was happy to have her home. A mother always wants her child close, doesn't she? I thought maybe I could help her heal, help her find herself again. But as the months turned into years, I watched my successful, confident daughter transform into someone I didn't recognize. The corporate job she lost after her marriage fell apart. The drinking that started as an occasional glass and became an everyday necessity. The anger that seemed to seep into every corner of our home. That particular morning, I heard the front door slam so hard the windows rattled. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew that sound. It meant Victoria had come home from wherever she'd been all night, and she was in one of her moods. I heard her footsteps, uneven and heavy, making their way through the house. She was drunk again. I could always tell by the way she walked, that stumbling, careless gait that made my stomach twist with worry, and something else I was ashamed to name. Fear. I stayed perfectly still in my chair, hoping maybe she'd just go straight upstairs to her room. But no such luck. The kitchen door swung open with a bang, and there she stood. Victoria was 46 years old, but in that moment, she looked both older and younger at the same time. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smeared, and her eyes had that glazed, unfocused look that came with too much alcohol. She was wearing a black dress that was wrinkled and stained, and she was holding her high heels in one hand. "Well, well," she slurred, leaning against the doorframe. "Look who's up." The perfect mother, sitting there judging me with those eyes. I wasn't judging her. I was terrified of her. But I kept my voice soft and steady. "Victoria, sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and get some rest? We can talk in the morning when you're feeling better." That was the wrong thing to say. It was always the wrong thing to say. Her face twisted into something ugly, something that didn't look like my daughter at all. She threw her shoes across the kitchen, and they hit the wall with a loud thud, leaving a black mark on the cream-colored paint I'd just redone last spring. "Don't you tell me what to do," she shouted, her voice echoing in the small space. "You don't get to tell me anything anymore. This is my house too. Actually, it should be my house. I'm your only daughter. I deserve it more than you do." I'd heard this speech before, many times. Ever since Thomas passed away 5 years ago, Victoria had become obsessed with the house, with the idea that somehow I was keeping something from her that was rightfully hers. But this night felt different. There was something darker in her eyes, something that made my blood run cold. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting. I'm not as young as I used to be, and arthritis has made my movements careful and deliberate. "Victoria, please, you're not yourself right now. Let's just—" "Shut up!" she screamed, and she lunged at me. I didn't have time to move. Her hands grabbed my arms, her fingers digging into my skin with a strength I didn't know she possessed. She shook me so violently that my glasses flew off my face and clattered onto the floor. The world became a blur of shapes and colors. My teeth rattled in my head, and I felt a sharp pain shoot through my neck. "You ruined my life," she was screaming, her face inches from mine. "You and Daddy with your perfect marriage and your perfect house. You made me feel like nothing was ever good enough. And now look at me. Look at what I've become." She wasn't seeing me. She was seeing every disappointment, every failure, every broken dream reflected in my face. And then she pushed me. Hard. I went flying backward. My back hit the edge of the kitchen counter with a sickening thud that knocked the air out of my lungs. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment I thought I might pass out, but I didn't. I slid down to the floor, my legs giving out beneath me, and I ended up sitting there, gasping for breath, unable to move. And then came the slap. Sharp, sudden, and so unexpected that I didn't even see it coming. Her hand connected with my face with a crack that seemed to echo through the entire house. The pain was immediate and burning, spreading across my cheek like fire. I tasted copper in my mouth. My lip had split open, and blood was already pooling on my tongue. Victoria stood over me, breathing hard, her chest heaving. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe recognition, maybe horror at what she'd just done. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold anger. She turned and walked away, just like that. She left me there on the kitchen floor, bleeding and broken, and I heard her footsteps going up the stairs. A minute later, her bedroom door slammed shut. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat there on the cold tile floor, my hand pressed to my bleeding lip, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. My daughter didn't love me, not anymore. Maybe she never had. What she felt for me was resentment, rage, and a twisted sense of entitlement that had poisoned whatever affection might have existed between us. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to have stopped. Eventually, I managed to pull myself up using the counter for support. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. I made my way to the small bathroom off the kitchen and turned on the light. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. My left cheek was already swelling, turning an angry shade of purple. My lip was split and crusted with dried blood. There was a bruise forming on my jaw. I looked like I'd been in a car accident. I looked like a victim. But as I stood there, staring at my reflection, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't even fear anymore. It was anger. Cold, clear anger that burned away everything else. I had spent the last 3 years walking on eggshells, making excuses, cleaning up messes, pretending everything was fine. I had let my daughter treat me like a servant in my own home. I had accepted her verbal abuse, her drinking, her tantrums, all because I was her mother. And mothers are supposed to forgive everything, aren't they? No, not this time. Not this. I washed my face carefully, wincing as the cold water hit my split lip. I looked at the bruises forming on my arms where Victoria had grabbed me. I touched the back of my head, which had a painful lump from hitting the counter. And I made a decision. This was the last time my daughter would ever put her hands on me. The last time I would be afraid in my own home. The last time I would choose her over myself. I left the bathroom and walked back into the kitchen. The clock on the wall said it was almost 6 in the morning. I had a few hours before most people would be awake. A few hours to do what needed to be done. I went to the cupboard and pulled out my largest mixing bowl, the one I use for holiday baking. Then I got out the flour, the sugar, the butter, all the ingredients for my famous blueberry scones. Thomas had always loved them. As I started mixing the dough, my hands moving with practiced ease despite their trembling, I began to think. I thought about my friend Eleanor, who lived 3 doors down. Eleanor Mitchell had been a family court judge for 30 years before she retired. She'd seen everything, heard everything. She would understand. She would know what to do. I thought about Officer Raymond Harris from our church, St. Michael's Episcopal. Raymond had known Victoria since she was a little girl. He'd watched her grow up, had even given her away at her wedding when Thomas was too sick to walk her down the aisle. It would break his heart to see what she'd become. But he was a man of the law first. And he would do what was right. And I thought about my sister Patricia, who lived up in Raleigh, North Carolina. Patricia had been warning me for years that Victoria was out of control, that I needed to do something before someone got hurt. Well, someone had gotten hurt. Me. And Patricia deserved to know. I finished mixing the dough and shaped it into rounds, placing them on my best baking sheets, the ones with the copper finish that my niece had sent me for Christmas. They heated evenly and never burned anything, perfect for what I needed today. As the first batch of scones went into the oven, I sat down at the kitchen table and picked up my phone. It was one of those newer smartphones that my grandson had set up for me, with all the numbers I might need already programmed in. My hands were steadier now. The shaking had stopped. I was thinking clearly for the first time in years. I dialed Eleanor's number first. It rang 3 times before her familiar voice, still sharp and commanding, even in the early morning, answered. "Marianne, is everything all right? It's barely 6 in the morning." I could hear the concern in her voice. Eleanor had always been perceptive. She'd probably noticed things at church, the way I'd started making excuses for Victoria's absences, the way I'd grown quieter over the past few years. "Eleanor," I said, and my voice was calm, steady. "I need you to come over for breakfast at 9 o'clock sharp. It's important. Life and death important." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Eleanor said in that judge voice of hers, "I'll be there. Do I need to bring anything?" "Just yourself," I replied. "And maybe your reading glasses. We might need to look at some paperwork." I hung up and dialed the next number, the police non-emergency line. A young woman answered, sounding tired from her night shift. "Charleston Police Department, how can I help you?" "Yes, hello. My name is Marianne Thornton. I need to speak with Officer Raymond Harris. It's regarding a domestic situation." "Ma'am, if this is an emergency—" "It's not an emergency at this exact moment," I interrupted gently. "But it is urgent. Officer Harris knows me and my family. We attend St. Michael's together. Could you please have him call me?" The woman took down my information and promised someone would contact me. I thanked her and hung up. Then I dialed Patricia's number in Raleigh. Patricia answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Marianne, what's happened?" Patricia has always had a sixth sense about me. Even when we were children, she could tell when something was wrong before I said a word. We're only 2 years apart, and we've been each other's confidants our entire lives. "It happened, Patricia. What you've been warning me about. Victoria." She put her hands on me. She hit me. I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath. Then, in a voice tight with fury and fear, she said, "Are you safe right now? Is she there?" "She's upstairs, sleeping it off. Unsafe for now. But Patricia, I've made a decision. I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm turning her in. I'm pressing charges." Then Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly, "Oh, Marianne, oh, my dear sister, I'm so sorry it came to this. I'm so sorry you had to go through this alone. I'm getting in the car right now. I'll be there by noon." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're my sister. I should have been there sooner. I should have insisted. I'll be there by noon, and I'm staying as long as you need me." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, just breathing. The smell of baking scones filled the kitchen, sweet and comforting. But there was nothing comforting about what I was about to do. I was about to destroy my daughter's life, or at least that's how it would look to the outside world. In reality, I was trying to save both of us, her from herself and me from her. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Officer Harris. His deep, kind voice came through the line, though I could hear the concern in it. "Mrs. Thornton, I got a message that you needed to speak with me. Is everything all right?" No, Raymond, I said, using his first name for the first time in all the years I'd known him. Everything is not all right. Victoria assaulted me last night. She came home drunk and violent, and she hurt me. I have injuries, visible injuries. I heard him curse softly under his breath. Mrs. Thornton, where is Victoria now? She's asleep upstairs. She passed out in her room. Raymond, I don't want a squad car showing up here with sirens blazing. I don't want the whole neighborhood gossiping about this. I want to handle this with dignity. I want you to come here at 9 o'clock this morning. Eleanor Mitchell will be here as a witness. We're going to sit down like civilized people, and then you're going to arrest my daughter. There was a long pause. Mrs. Thornton, that's highly irregular. In cases of domestic violence, we usually— I know what you usually do, I interrupted. But this is my home, my daughter, and my decision about how this is handled. I'm not asking for special treatment, Raymond. I'm asking for respect. I've been a member of this community for 50 years. I deserve to do this my way. Another pause. Then he sighed. Yes, ma'am, you do. I'll be there at 9 o'clock sharp. But Mrs. Thornton, if you feel unsafe at any point before then, if she wakes up and there's any trouble, you call 911 immediately. Promise me. I promise, I said. After I hung up, I pulled the first batch of scones from the oven. They were perfect, golden brown and fragrant. I set them on a cooling rack and prepared the second batch. As I worked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control, power over my own life. I wasn't a victim cowering in fear. I was a woman making a choice, taking action, refusing to accept the unacceptable anymore. While the scones baked, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I needed to get ready for what was coming. I stood in front of my closet, looking at my clothes. What does one wear to their daughter's arrest? The question would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. I chose a dress. It was a simple dress in a deep charcoal gray, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It was the kind of dress you wear to a funeral or a very serious occasion. I laid it out on my bed, along with my pearl necklace, the one Thomas gave me on our 25th anniversary. And I went to take a shower. The hot water stung the cuts and bruises, but it also washed away something intangible. The shame, maybe. The guilt. The feeling that somehow this was my fault for not being a better mother, for not knowing how to fix my broken daughter. As I stood under the spray, I let myself cry for the first time since it happened. I cried for the little girl Victoria used to be, the one who would bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the prettiest mommy in the world. I cried for the woman she'd become, so full of rage and pain that she couldn't see what she was doing to herself and everyone around her. And I cried for myself, for the loss of the dream every mother has, that their child will love them forever. But by the time I turned off the water, the tears were done. I dried off, got dressed, and did my hair in a neat bun at the nape of my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bruises stood out starkly against my pale skin. I've thought about covering them with makeup, but then I remembered something Patricia had said to me once. The truth doesn't need decoration, Marianne. It speaks for itself. So I left my face bare, except for a touch of lipstick. Not my usual soft pink, but a deeper shade, almost burgundy. It was a color that meant business, that said I wasn't backing down. I put on my pearls, slipped into my low-heeled pumps, and went back downstairs. The house was still quiet. Victoria hadn't stirred. Part of me hoped she'd sleep through it all, that she wouldn't wake up until it was already done. But that was the coward's way out, and I wasn't going to be a coward anymore. I set the dining room table with my good china, the set with the delicate blue flowers that had been my mother's. I used the white linen tablecloth that I only brought out for special occasions, and I placed fresh flowers in the center of the table. White roses from my garden that I'd cut the day before. Everything had to be perfect. This wasn't just breakfast. It was a ceremony, a formal declaration that my life as Victoria's victim was over. I arranged the scones on a silver platter alongside butter and homemade blueberry jam. I brewed a full pot of coffee in my good silver coffee service and set out cream and sugar in matching bowls. I put out 4 place settings, one for me at the head of the table, one for Eleanor on my right, one for Officer Harris on my left, and one at the far end for Victoria. As I worked, I thought about all the breakfasts we'd shared at this table over the years. Victoria's birthday mornings when she was little, Thomas and I laughing as she blew out candles on her special pancake stack. Holiday mornings with the extended family, the table groaning under the weight of food and love. Sunday mornings after church, peaceful and content. When had it all gone so wrong? When did my daughter's heart turn so cold? If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I checked the clock. It was 8:15. In 45 minutes, Eleanor would arrive. Officer Harris would come shortly after. And then the life I'd been living for the past 3 years would end, one way or another. I sat down in my chair at the head of the table and folded my hands in my lap. The house was absolutely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I closed my eyes and said a prayer. Not for forgiveness, not for strength, but for clarity, for the wisdom to do what was right, not what was easy, for the courage to see this through, no matter how much it hurt. At 8:45, I heard movement upstairs. My heart rate picked up, but I forced myself to stay calm. Victoria's bedroom door opened, and I heard her stumble into the bathroom. The water ran for a long time. She was probably trying to wash away the night, to make herself presentable. Little did she know that nothing she could do would change what was coming. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I stood up, smoothed down my dress, and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see Eleanor's silhouette. I opened the door. Eleanor Mitchell stood on my porch, looking every inch the retired judge she was. She wore a cream-colored linen suit with a silk blouse, and her silver hair was perfectly styled. But it was her eyes that caught me, sharp and assessing, taking in every detail of my face. "Oh, Marianne," she breathed, and for a moment, the professional facade cracked. She reached out and gently touched my cheek, just below the bruise. "She did this to you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Eleanor's expression hardened, and she stepped inside. "Where is she?" "Upstairs, getting ready. She doesn't know yet. She doesn't know anyone's coming." Eleanor nodded grimly. "And Raymond? He should be here any minute." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Officer Harris, in full uniform, looking deeply uncomfortable. Behind him stood another younger officer I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thornton," Raymond said formally. "This is Officer Jenkins. I hope you don't mind, but protocol requires I bring a partner for situations like this." "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Please, come to the dining room. Would you like some coffee?" The surreal politeness of it all wasn't lost on any of us. Here we were, treating this like a social call when we all knew what was really about to happen. But that's how I wanted it. Civilized, dignified. Not a trashy reality show scene, but a formal proceeding. We all went into the dining room and took our seats. Eleanor sat to my right, solid and supportive. Raymond and Officer Jenkins sat to my left. The scones sat untouched on their platter. The coffee steamed in its pot, and the chair at the far end of the table remained empty. "Mrs. Thornton," Raymond began, pulling out a small notepad. "I need to ask you some questions before we proceed. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" I took a deep breath and told them everything. I didn't leave anything out. I told them about Victoria moving back in 3 years ago, about the drinking that got progressively worse, about the verbal abuse that I tolerated for far too long. I told them about last night, about how she came home drunk and violent. I described how she grabbed me, shook me, pushed me into the counter, and slapped me across the face. I showed them the bruises on my arms where her fingers had dug in, the split lip, the swelling on my cheek. Eleanor listened with her judge face on, stern and unmoved, but I could see her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Raymond wrote everything down, his expression getting grimmer with every word. When I finished, he looked up from his notepad. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to be clear about this. Are you certain you want to press charges? This will result in Victoria's arrest. She'll be taken into custody, she'll be charged with assault, and depending on her record and the evidence, she could face significant consequences." "I'm certain," I said without hesitation. "I should have done this a long time ago." "Have there been other incidents of physical violence?" "No. Last night was the first time she actually hit me. But the verbal abuse, the intimidation, the destruction of property, that's been going on for months." Raymond nodded and made more notes. Then he looked at me with something like admiration in his eyes. "You're very brave, Mrs. Thornton. I know this can't be easy." "Brave?" I shook my head. "No, Raymond. I'm not brave. I'm just tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of making excuses. Tired of loving someone more than I love myself." That's when we heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Victoria was coming down. The entire room went silent. Eleanor straightened in her chair. Raymond and Officer Jenkins exchanged a look. I just sat there, my hands folded on the table, and waited. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the dining room. She was wearing jeans and a loose sweater, and her wet hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes bloodshot. She took one step into the room and froze. I watched as her brain tried to process what she was seeing. The formal table setting, Eleanor sitting there in her judge suit, the two police officers in uniform, and me sitting at the head of the table with my bruised face clearly visible, looking at her with an expression I'd never worn before. Not anger, not fear, just cold, absolute resolve. The color drained from Victoria's face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from person to person, looking for an escape, looking for an explanation that made sense. There wasn't one. "Victoria," I said, and my voice was steady and clear. "Please sit down." She didn't move. She just stood there, frozen, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Her gaze kept coming back to my face, to the evidence of what she'd done. I saw the moment it hit her. The moment she realized this wasn't a bad dream. This was really happening. "Mom," she finally whispered. What is this? What's going on?" Eleanor spoke up, her voice cool and professional. "Victoria, I'm Eleanor Mitchell. You might remember me from the neighborhood. I used to be a family court judge. Your mother has asked me to be here as a witness today." Victoria's eyes widened. "A witness? A witness to what?" "To this," I said, gesturing to my face. "To what you did to me last night. To the fact that you assaulted me in my own home." I didn't," Victoria stammered, but the lie died on her lips. She couldn't deny it. The evidence was right there on my face. Officer Harris stood up. "Victoria Thornton, I need you to remain calm. We're here to discuss the incident that occurred last night. Your mother has filed a formal complaint of domestic assault." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the doorframe. "You called the cops on me? Mom, you called the cops on me?" "Yes," I said simply. "I did. But I'm your daughter." The hysteria was rising in her voice. "How could you do this to me? How could you betray me like this?" That word. Betray. As if I was the one who had broken some sacred trust. As if she hadn't spent 3 years betraying my love, my trust, my hospitality. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, and when I spoke, my voice was cold as ice. "Betray you? Victoria, you put your hands on me. You grabbed me, you shook me, you threw me into the counter, and you slapped me across the face. You left me bleeding on the kitchen floor and went to bed like nothing happened. And you dare to talk to me about betrayal? Tears started streaming down Victoria's face. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again, I swear. You're right, I said. It won't happen again because you won't be living here anymore. Eleanor nodded approvingly. She turned to Victoria with that same cold, assessing look she must have used on countless defendants. Victoria, I remember you as a little girl. You were bright, ambitious, kind. Your parents were so proud of you. What happened to that girl? Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her tears. Life happened. My marriage fell apart. I lost my job. Everything went wrong. So you decided to take it out on the one person who loved you most? Eleanor's voice was sharp. You decided that your pain gave you the right to inflict pain on someone else? On your own mother? I didn't mean to hurt her, Victoria sobbed. I love her. Love? I repeated, and I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. You don't know what love is, Victoria. Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't make you afraid in your own home. What you feel isn't love. It's possession. You think because I'm your mother, I belong to you. That you can treat me however you want and I'll just take it, because that's what mothers do. I walked around the table, moving closer to her. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. I stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she had to look at my face, had to see the damage she'd done. Look at me, Victoria. Really look at me. This is what your love looks like. This is what your pain has done. And I'm telling you right now, as your mother, and as a woman who has finally learned to value herself, that I will not accept this anymore. I will not be your punching bag. I will not be your emotional dumping ground. I will not sacrifice my peace, my safety, and my dignity just because you're hurting. Victoria's legs seemed to give out. She slid down the doorframe until she was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands, sobbing. Please don't do this, Mama. Please, I'll get help. I'll stop drinking. I'll go to therapy. Just don't let them take me away. For a moment, just a moment, the mother in me wanted to cave, wanted to reach down, pull her into my arms, and tell her everything would be okay. But I looked at Eleanor, who was watching me with an expression that said, "Stay strong." I looked at Raymond, who was waiting for my decision, and I looked at the empty chair at the end of the table. The chair where Victoria should have been sitting for this conversation like an adult, not crumpled on the floor like a child caught stealing cookies. Victoria, I said, and my voice was firm. Getting help, stopping drinking, going to therapy, those are all things you should do. But you're going to do them because the court orders you to, not because I'm begging you to change. This ends today. Your choices brought us here. Your actions have consequences, and I love you enough to let you face those consequences, even if it breaks both of our hearts. I turned to Officer Harris. Raymond, please do what needs to be done. He nodded gravely and walked over to where Victoria sat crumpled on the floor. Officer Jenkins joined him. Victoria Thornton, Raymond said, his voice taking on the formal tone of authority. Please stand up. Victoria looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Raymond, please, you've known me since I was little. You know I'm not a bad person. Please don't do this. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. As he read her the Miranda rights, that familiar litany I'd heard 1,000 times on television, but never thought I'd hear in my own home, Victoria started to hyperventilate. No, 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 this can't be happening. This can't be real. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Raymond instructed. Victoria turned her pleading eyes to me one last time. Mom, please don't let them do this. I'm begging you. I met her gaze steadily. I'm sorry, Victoria, but I have to let them, for both our sakes. She turned around, still crying. And Raymond gently but firmly pulled her arms behind her back. The click of the handcuffs closing was one of the most painful sounds I've ever heard. It was the sound of a mother's worst nightmare and her greatest act of self-preservation happening at the same time. Wait, Victoria said suddenly, trying to turn around. At least let me get my purse, my phone. Your belongings will be collected and brought to you, Officer Jenkins said. Let's go, ma'am. They started to lead her toward the front door. As Victoria passed by me, she stopped for an instant. She lifted her head and looked me in the eye. Her face was wet with tears, but the tears had given way to something else now. Anger, resentment, hatred. I hope you're happy, she shouted, her voice filled with venom. I hope you enjoy your big empty house all alone. When I get out of this, don't expect me to ever speak to you again. You're dead to me, dead. The words should have hurt. They should have cut me to the core. But instead, I felt nothing. Or maybe not nothing. Maybe what I felt was relief. Relief that the pretense was over. Relief that she'd finally said out loud what her actions had been saying for years. Maybe, Victoria, I replied, my voice steady without a hint of hesitation. Maybe I'll regret that it had to come to this, but I will never, ever regret choosing my own life today. Detective Raymond gently pulled her by the arm and they continued walking. I watched them as they crossed the front hall. The other officer opened the front door. The bright morning sun flooded the hallway, making me blink. I didn't go to the door. I didn't want to see the curious neighbors peering out from behind their curtains. I didn't want to see the look on my daughter's face as she was put into a police car. I stood just inside my dining room and just listened. I heard their footsteps on the wooden porch. I heard Detective Raymond's voice saying something to her. And then I heard the sound of the police car door slamming shut. A hollow final sound. And then the sound of the engine starting and driving away until it faded into the distance. And then the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the early morning. It was a light silence. Empty, yes, painful without a doubt, but light. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a house that no longer held fear. I just stood there for I don't know how long. My muscles, which had been tense for hours, began to relax. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet started to dissipate, and a wave of exhaustion, so overwhelming, hit me. My knees buckled. Before I could fall, I felt a firm hand on my arm. It was Eleanor. She had gotten up and come to me. She held me steady, and the other officer, the one who had stayed behind, came over and pulled out a chair for me. Eleanor helped me sit down. It's over, Marianne, she said, her voice soft for the first time that morning. It's over. You did it. You saved yourself. Did I? I whispered. Or did I just destroy my daughter's life? You did what was necessary, Eleanor said firmly. Victoria destroyed her own life with her choices. You just stopped her from destroying yours too. There's a difference. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking. The dining room table was still set with its untouched scones and cooling coffee. It looked so absurd now, that formal setting for a conversation that had ended with handcuffs and arrest. Finally, Eleanor squeezed my hand. I'm going to make you some fresh coffee. Real coffee, not that fancy stuff. And then we're going to talk about what happens next. What happens next? I repeated dully. I don't even know what happens now. Now, Eleanor said, standing up and heading to the kitchen. You take care of yourself. That's what happens now. For the first time in 3 years, you get to think about what you need, not what Victoria needs. And the first thing you need is a lawyer. A lawyer. Of course, this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a legal process that would drag on for months. There would be court dates, testimony, possibly a trial. I would have to stand up in front of strangers and detail how my own daughter abused me. The thought was exhausting. Eleanor came back with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She'd found the good bourbon I kept in the kitchen for cooking and had added a splash to each mug. "Medicinal purposes," she said with a small smile, handing me one. I took a sip. The warmth and the burn helped center me. "Eleanor, what if I made a mistake? What if Victoria is right and I'm just a terrible mother who couldn't help her daughter when she needed it most?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "Stop that right now. That's your guilt talking, and guilt is a luxury you can't afford. You gave Victoria 3 years of chances. 3 years of your patience, your money, your home, your peace of mind. What did she give you? Fear? Pain? Abuse? She's a 46-year-old woman, Marianne, not a child. She's responsible for her own choices." "But she's my child," I said, and my voice broke. "She's my baby. How do I just turn off that part of me that wants to protect her?" Eleanor said softly, "You redirect it. Right now, the best way to protect Victoria is to let her face the consequences of her actions. Enabling her, making excuses for her, letting her get away with violence, that's not protection. That's slow murder. You're killing her with kindness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall so they can learn how to get back up on their own." I knew she was right. Intellectually, I knew. But my heart was another matter. My heart was broken into a million pieces, and I didn't know how to put it back together. Around 11 o'clock, Patricia arrived. My sister burst through the door like a hurricane, pulling me into a fierce hug the moment she saw me. She didn't say anything at first, just held me while I cried into her shoulder. When I finally pulled back, she cupped my face in her hands and looked at the bruises, with tears streaming down her own face. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm moving in. I don't care what you say. I'm staying here until you're back on your feet. Patricia, you have your own life in Raleigh. My life can wait. You're my sister. You need me. End of discussion." And that was Patricia. Fierce, loyal, absolutely stubborn when she'd made up her mind. Eleanor left shortly after Patricia arrived, but not before making me promise to call her if I needed anything, day or night. As she stood at the door, she turned back to me. "Marianne, one more thing. I want you to think about something. For the past 3 years, you've been living in Victoria's prison. Your whole life has revolved around managing her moods, avoiding her anger, trying to fix her problems. Now she's gone. The prison door is open. What are you going to do with your freedom?" It was a question I didn't have an answer to. Not yet. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Patricia and I went to the police station, where I gave my formal statement. I had to relive the whole night again, describing every detail to a sympathetic female officer who took photographs of my injuries and made me sign form after form. By the time we left, I was emotionally drained, running on nothing but coffee and Patricia's determination. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. I kept listening for Victoria's footsteps, her door opening, the sound of glass clinking in the kitchen. But there was nothing, just silence. And in that silence, I finally let myself think about the question Eleanor had asked. What was I going to do with my freedom? The first thing I did was sleep in. For 3 years I'd been waking up early, my body trained to expect trouble. But the morning after Victoria's arrest, I slept until 9 o'clock. Patricia made me breakfast, and we sat on the back porch, drinking coffee and watching the birds in the garden. It was peaceful, almost unnervingly so. "You're going to be okay," Patricia said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. You're one of the strongest women I know, Marianne. You survived losing Thomas, and you'll survive this too." Over the next few weeks, I started to build a new routine. A routine that was mine, not dictated by someone else's addiction and anger. I joined a support group for victims of domestic abuse. At first, I felt like a fraud sitting in that circle of women, most of them much younger than me, many of them with stories far worse than mine. But the therapist who ran the group told me something that stuck with me. Abuse is abuse, she said. It doesn't matter if it happened once or 100 times. It doesn't matter if it came from a stranger or your own child. The trauma is real, and you deserve support in healing from it. I made friends in that group, women who understood the complicated tangle of love and fear, the guilt and the anger. We shared our stories, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in what I'd experienced. There was Margaret, a woman in her 50s whose adult son had been stealing from her for years and had escalated to physical violence when she tried to cut him off. There was Sylvia, a grandmother whose daughter-in-law had been verbally abusing her every time she came to visit her grandchildren. There was Rosa, whose teenage grandson had pushed her down the stairs during a tantrum. We were all mothers, grandmothers, women who had been taught our whole lives that family came first, that we should sacrifice everything for our children and grandchildren. And we were all learning, slowly and painfully, that sacrifice shouldn't mean martyrdom. Victoria's case moved through the court system slowly. Her public defender tried to get the charges reduced, arguing that it was a first offense and that Victoria was struggling with alcoholism and depression. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Angela Rodriguez, wasn't having it. Thornton is a 46-year-old woman who physically assaulted her elderly mother, she said at the preliminary hearing. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. According to the victim's statement, there was a pattern of verbal abuse and intimidation that had been going on for years. The defendant needs treatment, yes, but she also needs accountability. I sat in the courtroom that day, in the gallery with Patricia beside me. I watched Victoria being led in by the bailiff. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the floor, her shoulders hunched. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The public defender, a young man who looked barely out of law school, argued passionately for leniency. He talked about Victoria's good job history before her divorce, her lack of prior criminal record, her willingness to seek treatment. But Angela Rodriguez stood firm. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong, "domestic violence is domestic violence, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator." In fact, when a child assaults a parent, it's particularly egregious because it represents a complete breakdown of the family structure and a betrayal of the most fundamental bond. Mrs. Thornton showed tremendous courage in reporting this crime. The court should honor that courage by holding the defendant accountable. The judge, a stern older man named Judge Whitmore, listened to both sides. Then he looked at Victoria over the top of his reading glasses. "Miss Thornton," he said, "the court recognizes that you're dealing with substance abuse and mental health issues. However, that does not excuse your behavior. Your mother is 72 years old. She took you in when you had nowhere else to go, and you repaid her kindness with violence. This court will not condone such behavior." He set a trial date for 6 weeks out, but before we reached trial, Victoria's lawyer came back with a plea offer. She would plead guilty to simple assault in exchange for the prosecutor's recommendation of a suspended sentence with mandatory conditions. Those conditions were strict. She had to complete 6 months in an inpatient alcohol rehabilitation facility, followed by a year of outpatient treatment and anger management counseling. She would be on probation for 2 years, and she was prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home unless I explicitly agreed otherwise. The day she entered her plea, I was there again. This time, Victoria looked at me, just once, briefly, as she stood before the judge. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, but there was something different in them. Not the cold anger I'd seen the day of her arrest. Something softer. Something that might have been remorse. After she pled guilty and the judge accepted the plea, Victoria's lawyer asked if I wanted to speak to her. I stood in the courthouse hallway, looking at my daughter through the small window of the conference room where they'd taken her. She looked so small, so broken, but I remembered what Eleanor had said. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall. No, I told the lawyer. Not yet. Tell her I hope she gets the help she needs. Tell her I love her, but tell her I can't have a relationship with her until she's proven she's changed. And that might take years, or it might never happen. Either way, I wish her well. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Carolina sunshine, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, not hope that Victoria and I would have the mother-daughter relationship I'd always dreamed of. That ship had probably sailed. But hope that I could build a life that was mine, a life filled with peace, purpose, and people who truly loved me. Patricia stayed with me for 2 months before finally going back to Raleigh. By then, I was ready to be alone. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, using my story to help other women find the courage to leave abusive situations. It was hard at first, telling strangers what had happened to me. But the more I talked about it, the more I realized that shame thrives in silence. When you bring abuse into the light, when you name it and claim it and refuse to hide it, it loses some of its power over you. I remember one woman in particular, a woman named Carmen, who was in her 30s. She'd come to the shelter after her boyfriend had put her in the hospital. She sat in the common room, staring at the wall, refusing to talk to anyone. The counselors had tried everything. Finally, they asked if I would sit with her. I pulled up a chair and just sat there in silence for a while. Then I started talking. I told her my story, how my own daughter had hurt me, how I'd been too ashamed to tell anyone for years, how I'd finally found the courage to save myself. When I finished, Carmen turned to look at me. Tears were streaming down her face. "Your own daughter did that to you?" she whispered. "And you still called the police?" "Yes," I said, because I finally understood that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. It doesn't matter if it's your daughter, your son, your partner, your parent. Abuse is abuse, and you don't deserve it. Carmen started crying in earnest then, and then she started talking. Once she started, she couldn't stop. She told me everything. The years of control, the isolation from her family, the escalating violence, and by the time she was done, she'd made a decision. She was going to press charges. She was going to get a restraining order. She was going to choose herself. I worked with Carmen for months after that, helping her navigate the legal system, sitting with her in court, celebrating with her when she got her own apartment. And in helping her, I found my own healing. There's something powerful about taking your pain and using it to help someone else. It doesn't erase what happened to you, but it gives it meaning. It transforms you from a victim into a survivor, and then into a warrior fighting for others. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I bought myself an easel and a set of watercolors and spent hours in my garden trying to capture the way the light fell through the magnolia leaves. I wasn't very good at first. My trees looked more like green blobs, and my flowers were unrecognizable. But I didn't care. It wasn't about being good. It was about doing something just for me, something that brought me joy. I reconnected with old friends I'd been too ashamed to see during Victoria's worst years. Margaret Lewis, who I'd known since our children were in elementary school together. She invited me to join her book club. And I said yes. Every other Tuesday, I went to someone's house, drank wine, ate cheese, and talked about books. Sometimes we actually discussed the book we were supposed to have read. Other times, we just talked about our lives, our children, our hopes and fears. It was normal. It was ordinary. And it was wonderful. I started taking better care of myself. I went to the doctor for a full physical. something I'd been putting off for years. I started walking every morning, making a loop around the neighborhood. I bought new clothes, things that made me feel good, not just practical items. I got my hair done at a real salon instead of cutting it myself. These were small things, but they added up. They were acts of self-love, of reclaiming my worth. And slowly, very slowly, I reclaimed my home. I repainted the kitchen, getting rid of the mark on the wall where Victoria's shoe had hit. I chose a cheerful yellow color, bright and warm. I replaced the blue vase she'd broken with something new, a beautiful piece of pottery I bought from a local artist at the farmer's market. It didn't carry the weight of memory, the burden of the past. It was just mine, chosen by me for me. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, moving things around until they felt right. I bought new curtains for the dining room, a soft cream color that let in more light. I planted new flowers in the garden, roses and lavender and black-eyed Susans. Every change I made was a declaration. This is my home. This is my space. This is my life. 6 months after Victoria entered rehab, I received a letter from her. My hands shook as I took it from the mailbox. I sat on the front porch, in the swing Thomas had built for me 40 years ago, and I opened it. The letter was short, written in pencil, on lined paper. Strong P. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I want you to know that I'm trying, really trying this time. The counselors here have helped me understand that I was taking all my failures, all my anger at myself, and directing it at the one person who never gave up on me. That's not love. That's poison. I poisoned our relationship, and I poisoned myself. I have a long way to go. But for the first time in years, I have hope that I can become someone better. Someone who would make Dad proud. Someone who might someday be worthy of being called your daughter again. Thank you for being strong enough to stop me. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall. I'm learning how to stand on my own now. I love you, Victoria. I read that letter 3 times, sitting there on the porch swing with tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Relief that somewhere inside the angry, broken woman Victoria had become, there was still a spark of the girl I'd raised. A spark that might, with time and help, grow into something stronger. Did I write back? Yes, but not right away. I waited 2 weeks, thinking carefully about what I wanted to say. I showed the letter to Dr. Simone, my therapist. I showed it to Eleanor. I showed it to Patricia. They all gave me the same advice. Be honest. Be clear about my boundaries. Don't make promises I couldn't keep. So when I finally put pen to paper, I kept it simple. Victoria, I'm proud of you for doing the work. Keep going. One day at a time. I love you, but I love myself too. And both of those loves are equally important now. We'll see what the future holds. For now, focus on healing. That's all either of us can do. Mom, I mailed the letter and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd responded with honesty. I could hope for her recovery while accepting that our relationship might never be what I once dreamed it would be. The seasons changed. Summer faded into fall. The magnolia trees in my yard dropped their leaves, creating a carpet of gold and brown. I raked them into piles and found a strange satisfaction in the simple physical labor. I was stronger than I'd been in years, not just physically, though the daily walks and the gardening had certainly helped with that. But emotionally, spiritually, I'd walked through fire and come out the other side, and I discovered something about myself. I was resilient. I was capable. I was worth saving. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Thanksgiving approached. Patricia called to invite me to Raleigh to spend the holiday with her and her family. It was a tempting offer, the thought of being surrounded by people of not having to cook for just myself was appealing. But something inside me said no. I wanted to stay home. I wanted to host Thanksgiving in my own house. To reclaim that tradition that had once meant so much to me. I invited Patricia and her husband, my niece and her family, Eleanor and a few other friends from church. I spent days preparing, cooking all the traditional dishes. I set the table with my mother's china, the tablecloth freshly laundered and pressed. I put candles on the table and fresh flowers from my garden. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie, like home. When everyone arrived on Thanksgiving Day, the house filled with laughter and conversation. We said grace, and I found myself truly grateful for the first time in years. Grateful for my sister who had stood by me. Grateful for Eleanor who had been my rock. Grateful for my friends who hadn't judged me. Grateful for my home, my health, my freedom. Grateful that I'd had the courage to save myself. After dinner, as we sat around the table drinking coffee and eating pie, Patricia raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said. "To my sister Marianne, the strongest, bravest woman I know. You faced the unthinkable this year, and you not only survived, you thrived. I'm so proud of you." Everyone raised their glasses. To Marianne, they chorused. I felt my eyes fill with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you all for standing by me, for not judging me, for helping me remember who I am." As the evening wound down and everyone started to leave, Eleanor pulled me aside. "How are you really doing, Marianne?" she asked. "And don't give me the polite answer. Give me the truth. Period." I thought about it for a moment. "I'm doing okay," I said finally. "Some days are harder than others. Some days I miss Victoria so much it physically hurts. Some days I feel guilty for what I did, but most days I feel free. Free and sad at the same time, but free." Eleanor nodded. "That's honest, that's real, and that's healing. You're allowed to have complicated feelings. You're allowed to love her and be angry at her. You're allowed to hope for her recovery while protecting yourself. Life isn't black and white, Marianne. It's all shades of gray." A year passed. Then another 6 months. Victoria completed her rehab program and her outpatient treatment. I heard updates through her probation officer, who called me every few months to check in. Victoria had gotten a job as a receptionist at a dental office. She'd found her own apartment, a small studio on the other side of Charleston. She was going to her AA meetings regularly. She was, by all accounts, doing the work. I received another letter from her, asking if we could meet for coffee. "Just coffee," she wrote, "in a public place. No pressure. No expectations. Just a chance to see each other." I thought about it for a long time. I prayed about it. I talked to Dr. Simone, and finally, I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown, one I'd never been to before. I wanted neutral territory, a place with no memories attached to it. I arrived first and chose a table by the window. I ordered a cup of tea and waited. My heart was racing, my palms sweating. I was more nervous than I'd been in months. Victoria arrived exactly on time. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around until she spotted me. And then she walked over. The woman who approached my table was not the daughter I remembered. She was thinner, her face more angular. Her hair was cut short in a simple, practical style. She wore jeans and a plain blue sweater. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They were clear, sober, and filled with an emotion I hadn't seen there in years. Humility. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." "Hi, Victoria," I replied. "Sit down." She sat across from me and folded her hands on the table. "I know this is awkward," she began. "And I know I don't have any right to ask anything of you. But I wanted to see you. I wanted you to see me. To see that I'm trying to become a better person." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for signs of the angry, violent woman she'd been. I didn't see her. The woman across from me seemed genuine, nervous, hopeful. Tell me about your program, I said. Tell me what you've been learning. And she did. She talked about the intensive therapy, the group sessions, the 12 steps of AA. She talked about confronting her alcoholism, admitting that she was powerless over it. She talked about making amends, about taking inventory of all the people she'd hurt and the damage she'd caused. The hardest part, she said, her voice breaking slightly, was looking at what I did to you. Really looking at it. Not making excuses. Not blaming the alcohol or my divorce or anything else. Just accepting that I, Victoria, made a choice to hurt the person who loved me most in the world. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. How do you live with it? I asked. By trying to be better every single day, she said. By staying sober. By going to my meetings. By being honest with myself and others. By accepting that some things can't be fixed, only learned from. We talked for an hour. It was stilted at times, awkward at others. There were long pauses where neither of us knew what to say. But there was also honesty. Raw, painful honesty. When it was time to go, Victoria stood up. "Can I hug you?" she asked hesitantly. I hesitated, and then I stood up and opened my arms. She stepped into them and we hugged briefly. It wasn't the warm, comfortable hug of a mother and daughter who trusted each other completely. It was careful, tentative, but it was a start. "Can we do this again?" Victoria asked as we walked out of the cafe together. "Maybe next month?" "Maybe," I said. "Let's take it one step at a time." "One step at a time," she repeated. That's all I can do. We did meet again the next month, and the month after that. Slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. Not the relationship we'd had before, that was gone forever. But a new relationship, founded on honesty and respect and clear boundaries. I never invited her back to the house. That remained my sanctuary, my safe place. We always met in public, in cafes or restaurants or parks, and I was always careful never to be alone with her in an enclosed space. Trust, once broken so completely, takes years to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. During one of our meetings, about a year and a half after her arrest, Victoria brought up something that surprised me. "Mom, I've been working with my therapist on making amends. That's part of the program. And I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to let me formally make amends to you." "What would that look like?" I asked cautiously. "Emma, it means I would sit down with you and acknowledge specifically everything I did wrong. I would take full responsibility without making excuses, and I would ask if there's anything I can do to make it right, knowing that some things can never be made right." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, that I'd heard enough apologies, that I didn't need her to rake it all up again. But another part of me, the part that was still healing, thought maybe it would help. Maybe hearing her take full responsibility without qualifications or excuses might bring some closure. "Okay," I said finally. "But I want Eleanor there. And I want to do it in a therapist's office with a professional present. And then I want to do it in a therapist's office with a professional present. Dr. Simone's office." Eleanor came with me, sitting beside me on the couch, while Victoria sat in a chair across from us. Dr. Simone sat off to the side, present but not interfering unless necessary. Victoria took a deep breath and began. "Mom, I want to make amends for the harm I caused you. I was living in your home, and instead of being grateful for your generosity, I took advantage of you. I verbally abused you, calling you names and belittling you. I stole money from you to buy alcohol. I destroyed your property in fits of rage, and finally, I physically assaulted you. I grabbed you, shook you, pushed you, and slapped you. I left you injured and bleeding on your kitchen floor. There is no excuse for any of this. The alcohol didn't make me do it. My divorce didn't make me do it. My job loss didn't make me do it. I did it. I made those choices. and I am deeply, profoundly sorry." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She kept going. "I took your love and your trust and I weaponized it. I used the fact that you're my mother, that you loved me unconditionally, as a shield to treat you terribly. I knew you would keep taking me back, keep forgiving me, and I exploited that. I was a bully and an abuser, and the fact that you're my mother makes it worse, not better." I sat there, listening, feeling Eleanor's hand squeeze mine. It was hard to hear. Every word was like opening an old wound, but it was also necessary. This was the accountability I'd needed. This was Victoria finally seeing herself clearly and naming what she'd done. "I can never undo the harm I caused," Victoria continued. "I can never take back that night or any of the nights before it. I can never erase the fear I made you feel in your own home. But I want you to know that I'm spending every day trying to become someone who would never do that again. I'm sober, I'm in therapy, I'm working on myself, and if there's anything I can do to make amends, anything at all, please tell me." When she finished, the room was silent. I looked at Victoria, at her tear-stained face, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the first small seed of it. "Victoria," I said slowly, "what you can do to make amends is continue doing exactly what you're doing. Stay sober. Stay in therapy. Build a life for yourself that isn't dependent on me or anyone else. Prove through your actions over time that you've truly changed. That's the only amends I need." She nodded, wiping her face. "I will. I promise I will. And understand this," I continued, my voice firm. "Our relationship will never be what it was. I will always love you because you're my daughter. But the trust is gone. The easy intimacy is gone. What we build from here, if we build anything, will be different. It will have boundaries. It will have limitations. I will never live with you again. You will never have unfettered access to my home or my life. We will meet in public places, on my schedule, when I'm ready. Is that clear?" "Yes," Victoria said. "That's more than fair. That's more than I deserve." After that meeting, something settled in me. I'd heard what I needed to hear. Victoria had looked me in the eye and taken full responsibility for her actions. She hadn't made excuses. She hadn't minimized or justified. She'd simply owned it, and that mattered. The months continued to pass. I settled into my new life, my free life. I started teaching a watercolor class at the community center, sharing my newfound passion with other beginners. I traveled for the first time in years, taking a trip to Maine with Patricia to see the fall leaves. I laughed more. I slept better. I felt lighter. Victoria and I continued to meet monthly. We talked about safe topics mostly. Her job, my volunteer work, books we'd read, shows we'd watched. Occasionally, we'd venture into deeper waters, talking about her recovery or my healing. But we never pushed too hard, never demanded more than the other was ready to give. 2 years after her arrest, Victoria asked if she could come to the house for Christmas. It was a big ask, a huge ask. The house had become my sanctuary, the one place that was entirely mine, entirely safe. Letting her back in felt like opening a door I'd worked so hard to close. I didn't answer right away. I thought about it for weeks. I talked to Dr. Simone, to Eleanor, to Patricia, to my support group. Everyone told me the same thing. It was my choice. I didn't owe Victoria anything. If I wasn't ready, I wasn't ready. But if I wanted to try, I should do it on my terms, with clear boundaries and an exit plan if things went south. Finally, I called Victoria. "You can come for Christmas dinner," I told her. "From 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Not overnight. You'll arrive at 2 and you'll leave at 6. If at any point I feel uncomfortable or unsafe, I will ask you to leave, and you will leave immediately without argument. Do you understand?" "I understand," Victoria said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for trusting me enough to try. I'm not sure I trust you, I said honestly, but I'm willing to take a chance. Don't make me regret it. I won't. She promised. Christmas Day arrived. I'd spent the morning cooking, filling the house with the smells of roasted turkey and baked ham and sweet potato casserole. Patricia and her husband were there, as well as Eleanor and a few friends from church. I'd told everyone that Victoria was coming, and I'd asked them to stay the whole time. I wanted witnesses. I wanted support. I wanted to make sure I wasn't alone with her. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and went to answer it. Victoria stood on the porch, looking nervous. She was dressed nicely in a simple green dress, and she was holding a poinsettia, plant, and a covered dish. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Merry Christmas. I brought green bean casserole. I know it's your favorite. And this plant for your porch." I looked at my daughter, at the effort she'd made, at the anxiety in her eyes. "Merry Christmas, Victoria," I said. "Come in." She stepped into the house she'd been banned from for 2 years. She stood in the foyer, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. "You repainted," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I've made a lot of changes." We went to the dining room where everyone was gathered. There were hugs, awkward at first, as Victoria greeted Patricia and Eleanor and the others. But gradually the tension eased. We sat down to dinner, Victoria at the far end of the table, away from me. I'd arranged it that way deliberately, close enough to participate, far enough that I didn't feel crowded. The meal was okay. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkward silence, moments when someone would start to mention the past and then catch themselves. But there were also moments of laughter, moments of genuine connection. Victoria told a funny story about a patient at the dental office where she worked. Patricia shared photos of her grandchildren. Eleanor recounted a hilarious incident from her days on the bench. After dinner, we all helped clean up. Victoria and I ended up at the sink together, washing dishes side by side. It was the first time we'd been alone together in the house since that night. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. She's not the same person, I reminded myself, and neither am I. "Mom," Victoria said quietly, not looking at me, "thank you for letting me come today. I know how hard this must be for you. I know what it means that you're giving me this chance." "It is hard," I admitted. "Every part of me is on high alert, waiting for something to go wrong. But I'm trying. That's all either of us can do." She nodded, still focusing on the plate she was scrubbing. "I want you to know that I think about what I did every single day. Every morning when I wake up, I remember that I hurt you. And every night before I go to sleep, I pray that someday you'll be able to forgive me. But I also understand if you can't, if you never can. I did something unforgivable." I set down the dish I was drying and turned to look at her. "Victoria, I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. I don't know if that's even possible. But I'm learning to live with what happened. I'm learning that I can love you and still protect myself. I can want the best for you while maintaining boundaries. We're building something new here. It's not the relationship we had before, and it never will be. But maybe it can be something else. Something honest." She turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Honest is good. Honest is more than I deserve." When 6 o'clock came, Victoria gathered her things to leave. She hugged Patricia and Eleanor, thanked everyone for including her. Then she turned to me. "Can I hug you goodbye?" I hesitated for just a second, then nodded. She hugged me gently, briefly. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Thank you for today. Merry Christmas, Victoria. Drive safe." After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling drained but also relieved. I'd done it. I'd let her into my home, and nothing bad had happened. The world hadn't ended, and most importantly, I'd maintained my boundaries. I'd stayed in control. Eleanor came to stand beside me. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted," I admitted. "But okay. It was okay." "You did good, Marianne," Eleanor said. "You were strong and compassionate at the same time." that's not easy. The next few years were a continuation of that tentative rebuilding. Victoria and I met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for lunch, occasionally for dinner at a restaurant. She came to the house for Christmas and Thanksgiving, always during the day, always with other people present. Slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed it happening, I started to relax around her. And now, she hit her 3-year sobriety anniversary, then her 4-year. She got promoted at work, becoming the office manager at the dental practice. She started dating someone, a man she met at her AA meetings who was also in recovery. She was building a life, a real life, that didn't revolve around me or depend on me. And I was building my own life too. I became certified as a domestic violence advocate, working with women at the shelter, and sometimes accompanying them to court. I took more art classes, branching out from watercolors to acrylics to oils. I joined a hiking group and started exploring the trails around Charleston. I dated briefly, a nice widower from church, though it didn't develop into anything serious. That was okay. I was learning that I didn't need a partner to be complete. I was whole on my own. 5 years after Victoria's arrest, she asked me something that surprised me. We were having lunch at our usual cafe when she said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something. My therapist and I have been working on it, and I wanted to run it by you." "What is it?" I asked, curious but cautious. "I want to speak publicly about what I did," she said, "about domestic violence in families, about addiction, about recovery. There are so many people out there who are hurting their family members and don't see it or won't admit it. I want to share my story, to maybe help someone else wake up before they do something they can't take back." I was silent for a moment, processing this. "That's a big step," I said finally. "Are you sure you're ready for that? For people to know what you did?" "I'm sure," she said. "I've been hiding from it for too long. Yes, I've done the work in therapy. Yes, I've stayed sober, but I've done it all privately. I think it's time to use my story to help others, but I wanted to make sure you're okay with it first. I don't want to cause you more pain or embarrassment." I thought about it, about what it would mean for people in our community to know the full story, about the gossip, the judgment, the pity. But I also thought about Carmen and all the other women I'd worked with at the shelter, about how powerful it had been for them to hear my story, about how sharing our truth, however painful, could help others find theirs. "If you're going to do it," I said slowly, "then I want to do it with you. I want to tell my side too, not to shame you, but to give the full picture. To help other parents understand that loving your child doesn't mean accepting abuse, that it's okay to protect yourself even from your own family." Victoria's eyes widened. "Are you sure? Mom, I don't want you to feel like you have to." "I'm sure," I interrupted. "If we're going to do this, let's do it together. Let's show people what real recovery and real rebuilding looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but honest." And so we did. We started speaking at conferences about domestic violence and addiction. We appeared on local news programs. We were interviewed for articles in newspapers and magazines. Always together, always telling both sides of the story. Victoria talked about her descent into alcoholism and violence. I talked about the fear, the shame, and the moment I decided to choose myself. The response was overwhelming. We received hundreds of letters and emails from people who saw themselves in our story. Adult children who realized they were abusing their parents. Elderly parents who found the courage to call the police on their abusive children. Therapists and social workers who thanked us for bringing attention to a problem that too often stayed hidden. One letter in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman in her 60s whose adult son had been physically abusing her for years. She wrote, "I always thought that being a good mother meant enduring anything for your child. But your story helped me understand that love doesn't require martyrdom. Because of you, I called the police. Because of you, my son is getting the help he needs. and because of you, I'm finally safe in my own home. Thank you for being brave enough to tell your truth. I kept that letter in a frame on my desk. On the hard days, when I questioned whether I'd done the right thing all those years ago, I would read it and remember. I'd saved myself, yes, but in doing so, I'd also helped save others. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Victoria and I will never have a traditional mother-daughter relationship. There are boundaries between us that will always exist. I will never again live with her, or depend on her, or let my guard down completely. The trust that was shattered that night can never be fully restored. But we have something else. Something that might be even more valuable. We have honesty. We have respect. We have a relationship built not on obligation or guilt, but on choice and intention. Today, as I sit on my porch in Charleston, watching the sun set over the magnolia trees, I feel something I couldn't have imagined feeling 8 years ago. Peace. Deep, abiding peace. Not because everything is perfect, not because all wounds have healed, but because I know, without a doubt, that I made the right choice. The choice to call the police that morning wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about recognizing that I deserved to be safe, that I deserved to be treated with respect, that I deserved to live without fear, and that those things were more important than maintaining a false peace or protecting someone who was hurting me. I think about that morning, Ocean. About standing in my kitchen at 5 in the morning, baking scones with a split lip and bruised face, making phone calls that would change everything. About the courage it took to open that door and let Eleanor and Officer Harris in. About watching my daughter being led away in handcuffs, knowing that it was the hardest and the rightest thing I'd ever done. Some people have asked me if I have any regrets. The answer is complicated. Do I regret that it came to that point? Absolutely. I regret that I didn't set firmer boundaries earlier. I regret that I enabled Victoria's behavior for so long out of misplaced love. I regret that I didn't recognize the warning signs and intervene before she hit rock bottom. But do I regret calling the police? Do I regret having her arrested? No, not for a single second. Because that decision saved both of us. It saved me from continued abuse, from living in fear, possibly from serious injury or death. But it also saved Victoria. It forced her to confront her addiction and her behavior. It made her face consequences she'd been avoiding her whole life. It put her on a path to recovery that she never would have found on her own. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their self-destruction. I've learned so much over these past years. I've learned that guilt is a heavy burden that serves no purpose. I've learned that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I've learned that you can love someone from a distance, that boundaries are not walls, they're bridges, and that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. I've learned that strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when to say enough. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. It's about understanding that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and that trying to do so will only drown you both. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. I was 72 years old when I made that choice. 72. Many people would have thought I was too old to start over, too old to rebuild my life. But they would have been wrong. Age doesn't determine your ability to change, to grow, to reclaim your power. I'm proof of that. Victoria is proof of it too. At 46, she thought her life was over. She'd lost her marriage, her job, her dignity. She'd hit what she thought was rock bottom. But rock bottom, as it turned out, was just the foundation she needed to rebuild on. Today, at 54, she's sober, employed, in a healthy relationship, and using her story to help others. She's not the same person she was 8 years ago. Neither am I. We've both had to die to our old selves to become who we are now. Our story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. We're not best friends. We don't talk every day or share all our secrets. We don't pretend that what happened didn't happen or that everything is perfectly fine. But we have something real, something built on truth and accountability and hard-won respect. And maybe that's better than a fairy tale. Maybe that's what real love looks like after it's been tested by fire and rebuilt from the ashes. I want to say something to anyone who's listening to this story and seeing themselves in it. Whether you're a parent being abused by your child, a child being abused by your parent, a partner being abused by your spouse, or anyone else caught in a cycle of domestic violence, you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to live without fear, and you don't owe your abuser your suffering. It doesn't matter if they're family. It doesn't matter if you love them. It doesn't matter if they're sorry afterward or if they promise to change. What matters is your safety, your well-being, your life. And if protecting those things means calling the police, getting a restraining order, or cutting contact completely, then that's what you do. You don't need permission. You don't need to justify it. You just need to choose yourself. I know it's scary. I know it feels like betrayal. I know you'll face judgment from people who don't understand. But I also know that on the other side of that fear is freedom. On the other side of that hard choice is peace. On the other side of that pain is a life worth living. For the abusers who might be listening, I want to say something to you too. It's not too late to change. It's not too late to get help. But change has to come from you. It can't be forced on you by someone else's love or patience or forgiveness. You have to want it badly enough to do the hard work, to face your demons, to take responsibility without excuses. And sometimes the wake-up call you need is losing the person you love. That's not cruelty. That's reality. Offspring parse, Victoria lost me. Or at least, she lost the version of me that would tolerate her abuse. And that loss, that consequence, was what finally made her willing to change. If I had forgiven her that morning, if I had cleaned up the blood and pretended it didn't happen, she never would have gotten sober. She never would have faced her addiction. She probably would have killed me eventually. Or at the very least, continued to make my life a living hell. By choosing myself, I gave us both a chance at a better life. Offspring parse. I'm 79 years old now. I've lived a lot of life, seen a lot of things. And if there's one thing I know for certain, it's this. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you'll get more disrespect. If you accept abuse, you'll get more abuse. But if you stand up and say, no more, I deserve better, I'm worth more, then you create the possibility for something different. Not always with the same person. Sometimes they can't or won't change, but at least with yourself. You change your relationship with yourself, and that changes everything. Today, I live alone in my Charleston home, and I love it. I have my routines, my friends, my volunteer work, my art. I have Victoria in my life, but on my terms, with my boundaries. I have Patricia, who calls me every Sunday without fail. I have Eleanor, who still comes over for coffee and reminds me how far I've come. I have a community of women I've helped through the shelter, and who have helped me in return. I have a life that is full and meaningful and mine. Every morning, I wake up without fear. I go through my day without walking on eggshells. I go to bed at night feeling safe. These simple things, these ordinary things, are extraordinary gifts. They're gifts I gave myself by having the courage to say enough. So to anyone out there who's living in fear of someone they love, who's making excuses for unacceptable behavior, who's sacrificing their peace for someone else's comfort, I say this: it's time to choose yourself. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it will be worth it. I promise you, it will be worth it. My name is Marianne Thornton. I'm 79 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a survivor of domestic violence at the hands of my daughter. I'm an advocate for other survivors. I'm an artist, a volunteer, a friend, a sister. I'm a woman who learned at 72 that it's never too late to save your own life. And I'm free. That's my story. That's how one terrible night became the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. That's how I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That's how I discovered that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's codependency. And that's how I found my voice and learned to use it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing my truth. Thank you for being part of this community of survivors and fighters and women who refuse to be victims. Your support means everything. If this story resonated with you, please share it. You never know who needs to hear it. You never know whose life might be changed by knowing they're not alone. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Remember, you are worthy, you are valuable. You are deserving of respect and safety and peace. Never forget that. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you find yourself in a situation where you need to choose between someone else's comfort and your own safety, always, always choose yourself. Until next time, take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and remember that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. Standing up for yourself isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. And choosing to live free of fear isn't optional. It's essential. This is Marianne Thornton, signing off. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay true to yourself.